I want to take a look today at the story of Jacob in the Hebrew Bible, which is part of Genesis. It comprises like half a dozen chapters. Uh, Isaac, or rather Jacob, is the son of Isaac, who is their descendant from Abraham, whom you can mark your the lineage back to Noah, and then of course ultimately to Adam. So you see a very clear lineage getting laid out, and lineage is a very real thing in these stories. It's a very significant thing. It's something that in the reading of it can tend to get glossed over. The sort of the cliche version of the lineages are all like, and this one begat this one, and it's like one unpronounceable name begat this other unpronounceable name, and I don't know. But it is significant how they all sort of they mark the passage of time, but they also link the times. Many generations pass by, and in many of these generations have what we would consider unnatural lifespans. I think Jacob's father Isaac, I think he lives something like 175 years. And you get up to Abraham, and that's nothing compared to what Abraham lives. And Noah, oh my God, like But this thing that always jumps out to me about those is that you get a sense of this enormous continuity from one generation to the next, a clear line from, let's say in this case, Jacob, through Isaac, through Abraham, through Noah, back to Adam. And Adam is, of course, the first human being, and, the one created by God, handcrafted, if you will. So that sense of a tie to the divine, I think, is very potent. But it is also an indication of just how far away it's gotten. Now, remember, you have to understand that there is a kind of degeneration, perhaps, that occurs over time. The Bible is full of stories like Noah's, where, quite frankly, humanity has degenerated so much that God feels the need to wipe them out. There is a sense of degeneration that goes on. So that tension is always there in all of these stories, between that through line of descendants, both connecting the children of Israel with God and also marking its distance, because each time they seem to get just a little further away from God's hand. All right. I'm going to mute everybody so that we don't have the feedback so much. But again, anybody wants to chime in, please unmute yourselves and, let's talk. The story of Jacob marks an interesting character in a way that hasn't really appeared in the Bible before this. He is a sneaky little bastard. He is deceptive. He is, quite frankly, quite dishonest in a number of key moments in his life. Uh, that is a far cry from, let's say, the story of Abraham, who is always really quite above board. And you don't really, uh, you're not really invited to speculate on how morally just he is, even when he's, about to sacrifice his son. Uh, you don't really doubt the essential goodness of the man, or at least you're not supposed to. I think we can say that from the text. The story of Jacob gives us a character who is automatically set up as a contrast. He is a twin. His father Isaac and his mother, they have difficulty, just like, quite frankly, the birth of Isaac was a twin, and the result of divine intervention after his mother had difficulty conceiving, and when Isaac and Rebecca, his wife, want to have children, they have some frustrations with that too. But God intervenes after a prayer by Isaac. Sorry, it is difficult to keep all the names straight. And Rebecca becomes pregnant. And it's a difficult pregnancy. She at one point feels great distress, like, there's a lot of churning going on down there. My wife had twins, so I kind of know a little something about that. And yeah, they can be in some, they can make things happen down there. Let's just keep that simple and clear. The section of this that we have in the Norton Anthology, I think, is really quite interesting because of the graphic novel aspect of it. You can really get a sense of it. Let's face it, pictures help. They give you something a little bit more to hold on to rather than just the words, which can all sort of bleed together after a little while. We are by nature, I think, at this point, a visual species. And when you see the portrait of Rebecca, and this is, what is it, Genesis 25, it's page 167 in the Norton 4th edition. She's holding her belly, and there's something very physical about that, something very recognizable about that. Feeling the clash that is going on within her, and this leads to her questioning her own position in the universe. She gets oddly philosophical at this moment. She is sort of caught up in this big struggle within her womb, and it leads her to wonder, well, what am I? Why am I having to experience this? And God tells her there are two nations struggling within your womb right now. They are the progenitors of two separate nations. What is the effect of being told right at the beginning that God himself is interpreting your particular OBGYN issue, perhaps just intestinal distress, it's unclear, as well? No, this needs to be understood as more than just two fetuses elbowing one another. This is something greater than that on a socio-political scale. two nations. What is the effect of being told that at that moment in the text when you're reading it? You know that, well, it does create an expectation of something more significant than just two kids, jostling one another. Who doesn't fight with a sibling from time to time? I have a brother, and I'm surprised either one of us survived our childhoods. But being told that it's not just pure sibling rivalry, it's something more. We are told at the start that God himself sees a representative value in these two things, in these two children. They are not just children, they are nations. And that's how this text wants us to understand them. So that, it's easy enough to just blow off, oh yeah, difficult pregnancy, hey, my aunt went through one of those, been there. It's rough. She was just always moaning and could never get comfortable and had difficulty sleeping, and she'd blah, 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 blah. It's not that personal. It's not that identifiable. It's something much grander. God wants to frame in this narrative, frame this conflict within her womb as something impersonal and geopolitical, two nations. And more to the point also, this is God saying this. And when God said stuff, these things matter. Remember, the creation of the universe was just God saying the things. Let there be light. And then there was light, and it was good. The power of God to just say something and will it into being through the power of his words, the logos, as it is known for some, is an undercurrent for everything in these narratives. And in this case, he is saying that these two children struggling in your womb are nations struggling for prominence, as if he's willing it to happen. He is bringing that conflict into being. Now, we can say that. And at that moment in the text, that's all we have to go on. But we do have, as was suggested, a certain knowledge of what comes next in the story and what is perhaps being framed or introduced in this on a political and geopolitical level. Jacob and his brother. His brother's name will be Esau. And these two wrestle from the womb throughout their lives. They're in contention. Jacob particularly is always in contention. But Jacob and Esau are understood to be representative of different nations. Jacob will ultimately be the father of the Israelites, and Esau will be the father of a group called the Edomites. Significantly, these stories, while weaving together a lot of threads from oral histories that had been passed down for generations and generations and generations, these stories had lived in the culture, but they were first really assembled in this. Most scholars believe in this general form, or beginning to be assembled during the rule of King David in the roughly 10th century BC, around 1000 years BCE. In that time, scholars tell us that the Israelites, King David at the head, were the prominent social political force in the culture, and they were, well, the underclass, if you will, the servant class, if you will. Perhaps some have argued the slaves, if you will, were the group known as the Edomites, the children of Esau. So when you see that kind of hindsight, because here, this is people in the time of King David assembling this text about what was for them already the ancient past, and telling telling their contemporaries that, well, it is natural for these two groups to be struggling with one another. It is ordained, but it is also ordained that one of the groups is always prominent over the other. The Israelites will always be preeminent, and the Edomites will be servants, or, if you like, slaves. Does that sound like you are legitimizing or condemning that social structure? They have the cushy position from the relatively, late time period of 1000 BCE of saying, well, yeah, the way things are right now, where the Israelites, us, are in charge of, or set above in the hierarchy over the Edomites, them. That's good. That is how God set it up from the start. It's natural that they're going to fight from time to time, that they're going to struggle with one another. But that's all part of God's plan too. And in the end, it'll always be the Israelites on top. It's a convenient justification, I would say. But at the same time, we are told that we are given these two really fascinating characters of Jacob and Esau, and the characters. It's you have to draw your own opinion of that. We are told that at birth, after having struggled in the womb, always sitting there wrestling and going at it, like, boys tend to, brothers tend to. Esau is born first. And then Jacob comes out grabbing at Esau's heel. You're like, come on. You're not getting away from me that easy. Struggling to get to his brother Esau. And that relationship is that little dynamic captured in that image captures the essence of their relationship throughout, where Esau, as firstborn son, that's a special position, particularly in the ancient world where the laws of primogeniture prevailed, where a father dies, and it is the firstborn son who tends to get everything. That's just the way their culture worked. And here we have a firstborn son, Esau, and Jacob is sort of like scratching at him, saying, "No, no, no." And throughout, you see Jacob doing that. Jacob deceives his brother repeatedly. Deceives his brother and deceives his father about his brother. They have the famous moment where Esau comes in, and again, you can see in the drawing, it's kind of dramatic. Esau comes in from hunting one day. He's always associated with hunting, and he's really hungry, and he's just famished. He says, "Oh, I got to eat something." And he sees his brother has a big bowl of or pot of lentil stew, and he says, "Oh, I'm starving. I got to eat something. I got." And Jacob says, "Okay, that's interesting." And instead of just doing, the brotherly thing, and says, "Well, here, have a bowl, have some stew," he says, "Okay, I will give you some stew if you give me your birthright." In essence, your prominence in the inheritance. And Esau only knows that he's hungry, and he said, "All right, fine, yeah, give me it, give me," and he just sort of grabs it and gobbles it down. He was swindled. That is that was a bit of a scam. Jacob took advantage of his brother, whose nature as a sort of simple person, devoted to, simple pleasures, and almost animalistic pleasures, Jacob was able to take advantage of, to exploit. The nature of the two of them ties into this also. And here, the drawings that we see in the graphic novel aspect of this really help, because the characters are so different. We are told that Esau is a hairy man, very shaggy, hirsute for some, SAT word. But we're told he has long hair, he has a full beard, he's kind of rough and ready. The hair, we're told, at certain points seems to be red, so he's very passionate. Here's a little literary allusion. He seemed to be very passionate and very intense. And Jacob is different. Jacob, we are told, is much more mild, much more cool and under control. His skin is much smoother. He's not necessarily clean shaven, but his skin is smoother than, and his hair is smoother than Esau's. So he is set up as a contrast. And whereas Esau loves to go out and hunt, be outside, tracking game, Jacob is more comfortable inside. He's an indoor cat. He likes to be in the tent, and he's always under control. He's never particularly agitated. He's always thinking in a kind of calculating way, perhaps. These are interesting character types, because who do you find yourself associating with more or sympathizing with more? Who seems more likable? Why didn't God just, set in stone? Okay, if Jacob is always going to be the better, and Esau and his people are supposed to be the servants, Why didn't he just make that at the start? Why couldn't Jacob be the firstborn, and then so much would be so much simpler with this? Well, I don't know. I think it's important, however, to remember that um first association of this being not two children but two nations. It automatically abstracts it and puts it in that political realm. So you're not supposed to think about this in terms of, two brothers and sibling rivalry and all of that stuff. It is supposed to be a political association. So maybe this is an indication of justifying political revolution if it is God ordained. One time exclusive right to come up on, maybe when your tribe is in the underclass, and say that, well, that's not how God wants it. And you set things right. And then, of course, it gets frozen. Say, well, no, this is how God wants it, so this is the way it has to be. He says that we're on top. Maybe. We will come back to this, but the notion here is that struggle that is going on in the womb is everlasting. It will always be that way, and maybe God wants it that way. That the Edomites will always be, striking back a little. Maybe. It's hard to really reconcile this with most logic. The character of the two of them is fascinating. Esau seems pretty sympathetic. He's, just kind of a big oaf. He likes to be outdoors. He's a manly man, as we would associate him, as we might associate him with. He's got the extra testosterone to prove it. He's got all the hair. He's very rugged. He's a guy's guy. By contrast, Jacob seems a little bit more, refined, let's say. He is an indoor guy, a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more civilized, perhaps. The image of Esau just sort of like sticking his face in the bowl of lentil stew and, going at it, that's an animal, essentially. And that kind of pairing is always interesting in ancient literature. The story of Gilgamesh from ancient Mesopotamia of the same era, just a little bit further to the east, pits one hero who is relatively smooth skin against a barbaric counterpart who is very hairy, likes to hunt, is very animal-like, and we're meant to contrast these two and try and figure out, well, what is the best way to be? And here, even that is troubling because Jacob seems like such an SOB. He's so tricky. He's so deceptive. He is, scholars have noted his character as being an evidence of a trickster figure, which exists in a lot of cultures from the ancient world. A kind of a naughty character who's always playing jokes on people, who's always trying to use his cunning to outsmart people. He's very sneaky, sometimes morally quite questionable. And he falls into that category. Jacob tricks his brother, and then later goes and on his father's deathbed tricks his father with the help of his mother into making him into giving him the blessing before Esau. Esau is his father's favorite, the guy's guy, hey, look at my boy, he's going out there and he's going hunting just for me. You get the sense of Isaac being the dad on the sides of the soccer field, just cheering for his kid. Yeah, go get him. And there's a kind of simple joy in that. But it's his mother, Rebecca, who comes off a little suspiciously again. Always the sneaky stuff is almost always reserved for women's influence. They always come in for a little bit of a twist of the knife in these narratives. And here, Rebecca, who otherwise seems to be a fine person, is shown always scheming to put her favorite, Jacob, ahead of his brother, advancing his interests at the expense of Esau's. Very questionable parenting. The two of them, Isaac and Rebecca, are then in a kind of conflict. And so they do certain things that makes it seem like this rank favoritism. Who would do this? This is very questionable parenting. As somebody who again has raised twins, you don't want to follow this instruction manual here. But what I think is interesting here is that God has already singled out, okay, this is how it's going to be. Jacob is going to be in charge. And Esau, regardless of his place in the birth order, Esau will have to serve him. So once God says that, once God ordains that this is the way it's supposed to be, how much can you blame Isaac and Rebecca? Aren't they just acting out God's plan? Where does that individual responsibility kick in? Do they have free will after all? All of these questions are undercurrents, as they are throughout the entire Hebrew Bible. These questions are always there. And the simplicity of the story itself can be very deceptive. Because remember, whoever is assembling this text is aware of the stories handed down through generations. And they're just trying to set them down, but set them down in a very specific order. And think again of the effect of being told at the start that God says, this is the way it is. That signals to the reader that, okay, that's how I'm supposed to interpret everything that goes along. So I can forgive Isaac and Rebecca for some very questionable parenting choices. I can just forgive even Jacob for his sneaky bastardy. But does that make me complicit in their mistakes, though? Am I falling out of favor in God by feeling bad for them or for not feeling bad for them? Where is my role as a reader, as a moral agent in this? All of these questions keep sucking you in. And that one detail at the beginning shows how deliberate this text is. God wants it to be this way, and everything else doesn't matter. That orders everything else so that you can't come down too hard on any of them. You can't be too absolute in condemning them, no matter how crappy you feel that Jacob is treating his brother, or how underhanded and sneaky he is in dealing with his dying father. It puts the reader in a very questionable position. What are we supposed to think about these things? Well, the text seems to be telling you, nudging you into thinking certain ways about it. The relationship between the two brothers is played out as a kind of story of sophistication and all the good and bad that goes with that word, and a kind of barbarity. And think about this in terms of, again, somebody from later centuries trying to indicate what sort of people do we want in our kingdom. People of sophistication, perhaps. People who are always thinking. People who are, smart, quite frankly. Not the simple, good-natured oaf of Esau, who's always willing to go out and, go hunting and bring back some game to feed the tribe. Those people are important, but they're servants. The people who can strategize just a little bit more, people who can anticipate problems, people who can solve problems and make things happen on their own without resorting to God's help. Well, maybe that's more useful in a kingdom. So they want to reward that quality and just remind the people who are just, good old boys out there having a good time and, doing the work, but they should all be just simply slaves. And isn't it convenient that we have this story here that tells them that God wants it exactly that way? This story was pointed to an awful lot in justifications of slavery throughout history, around the world, saying that, well, God not only, allowed it, he seemed to endorse it. He created it in a sense. That's a troubling notion. The challenge for many, well, once you get over the betrayal of Esau, and that's sort of there, but the text, the narrative follows Jacob on further adventures, and in it he comes up against a number of other challenges that mark him out as a more heroic figure, and will solicit some sympathy to sort of make up for or answer some of the deviousness of his youth. You see him at his mother's urging, for his own safety. You got to get out of town, boy. She sends him east to her brother Laban, who is in Mesopotamia, essentially. I think Haran is the name of the city. And she sends him out and says, okay, you go find him and you just, let things cool down here, and you'll be safer over there. Mom wants her boy, her favorite, to go and spend some time with her family. Family dynamics and in-laws, you can see. And he goes and he meets Laban's daughters. We are told explicitly that the one that he likes is Rachel, and we are told explicitly as well that she is a shepherdess, and we are told repeatedly that this is his cousin, the daughter of his the daughter of his mother's brother, or something like that. That phrase just keeps popping up, reminding you. Now, from our perspective, we're like recoiling a little, I assume, like, that's your cousin, and your first cousin too, it seems. That's kind of awkward. But this is another instance of, well, you can't step in too closely with your knowledge of, modern genetics or anything. But this is an example, I would say, of a concern with purity of line in a tribe. You keep your tribe close. So that family connection is very significant. And you see him go through this little episode with his uncle. He's very interested in Rachel, and he says, okay, Uncle Laban, I will work for you for 7 years, so long as at the end of that 7 years, you give me Rachel as a bride. And Laban says, yeah, okay. Shrewd negotiator. Significantly, again, this is Laban from Mesopotamia, a rival civilization off to the east, being a little shrewd and a little sneaky on his own, because at the end of that 7 years, he dresses up Rachel's sister Leah as Rachel and marries them off, sends her to his tent, and Jacob doesn't really realize it until the next morning, let's say. And he goes and he feels very betrayed, obviously. And Laban says, well, too late now. But you can see in that a kind of reversal or a mirror image of what he did, of swapping siblings, betraying a family member, a trusted, somebody that you had thought that there would be a relationship of trust for, violating that trust to betray them by substituting one sibling for another. That's essentially what he did with his own family, with his own brother and father. So now it's been done to him. That tables turn moment is very intriguing, because it shows, okay, this isn't just another episode. This is him perhaps learning as life goes on. He is now older, and with that, perhaps you start to reevaluate some of your life choices or even your character itself. And so he accepts that, oh, okay, well, I have Leah, but I still want Rachel. So he goes to Laban and says, okay, I'll do another 7 years. And at the end of that 7 years, I'll already have Leah, but then you'll give me Rachel too. Okay? Deal. And they go through that. And at the end of 7 years, he is given as a bride, Rachel, to join her sister, his other bride, Leah, and two handmaidens, who I think, I might be getting this wrong. I think were also like younger sisters, perhaps of a different mother. He's got essentially 4 women at home, and the 4 of them will end up bearing him. I think it's 12 sons and 1 daughter. The 12 sons will each be the father of one of the 12 so-called 12 tribes of Israel. So he really is, in a sense, Jacob, the progenitor of his nation, which was essentially the Abrahamic covenant to begin with. You will have progeny. You will be the father of nations. This is all coming true for him. But he gets this, and he's still living in Mesopotamia. And significantly, we get like 2 mysterious sequences, again bookending, very neatly balanced. One on his way to Mesopotamia to find Laban. He has a dream. He's fallen asleep out in the middle of the wilderness. Wandering in the wilderness is very much a thing here. And he just, he's walking several thousand miles, and he gets tired at one point. He lies down to go to sleep in the open air, resting his head very notably on a stone as a pillow. Don't ask me. But in this dream, he has a vision of a ladder, Jacob's ladder, ascending or descending, connecting essentially earth and the heavens above. And around that ladder, he sees angels swirling, or angel figures of some form. Seraphim, I believe, is really the term that they use. And he wakes up and God speaks to him. The first real interaction he's had directly with God. And God reiterates the essential covenant of Abraham, meaning I will give you progeny, I will give you children. And this is right before he goes and finds Leah and Rachel. I will give you children, and I will give you land. And that is at the core of the tribe's identity leading up to Jacob here. And he even goes a step further and says, and I will look out for you too. I will protect you individually as a person. And remember that tension between the identity of an individual as a human being and also as a representative of a nation is always there. So you're not sure necessarily, is God saying he's going to be looking out for the nation specifically, or the individual within the nation very narrowly. All of these interpretations are very much in tension. So you're always trying to figure this out. But what is significant, I would say, about the latter imagery is it's an interesting vision in that, again, like the genealogies, it marks a connection and a separation between the realm of God and the realm of man. It is a conduit between the two places, between heaven and earth. It is also a kind of separation. Significantly, God is not shown in this vision descending the ladder, even though he will be speaking to Jacob soon enough. And you don't see humanity climbing up the ladder. Only the seraphim are circling around it. That seems to be just their role as intermediaries in that kind of liminal space. So how do you take that? Well, are you a glass half full type of person or a glass half empty? Does it mark our connection to the heavens or our distance from it? Is it a gate or is it a portal? All of these questions are irresolvable. But I think it's significant that, again, it's sort of reminding you that there is that tension between God's presence and his distance. And then at the later, after he goes and meets Laban and gets Leah and then Rachel and the handmaidens and all that, when he is on his way back, he's going to return to his own homeland. He's going to return to Esau and confront his brother. Now, things were unresolved with Esau when he fled. And, it's awkward returning home when you're not quite sure, what am I facing? But in that moment, you see him coming through. We're told he returns through the wilderness, and at a certain point, he lets his family and servants and everybody traveling with him go ahead. So he's all alone in the wilderness again, and he comes to a river, the Yabok River, I believe it's called. And of course with the soft J, that would spell out as Jabbok, which sounds like a slight reversal of Jacob, let's say, with the B and the C reversed. So there's that little pun going on there, the identity of the river with Jacob, but also Jabbok in Hebrew, I believe, is essentially the verb he wrestles. Interesting, or he struggles. Because it is at that site that in the middle of the night, standing at the edge of this river, on the edge of this wilderness, on the frontier of his brother's property, his own homeland, that he confronts a stranger, just a man, as we're told. And they wrestle for, no apparent reason, really, other than this seems to be very symbolic, very representational. Again, that from birth, these aren't necessarily human beings. These are representations. These are abstractions. These are symbols. And you get Jacob wrestling with this figure. We're told is a man, but is something eerie about that. There's so much going on just in that. The fact that he is wandering alone in the wilderness. People will be writing about this for centuries and millennia to come. The lonely figure wandering around, just a little bit lost, trying to confront something. He's on his way back to his home to confront his brother and to deal with not only his brother, but to confront his own past, his own shame, his own, I was kind of a jerk to you. How do you go and apologize to someone when you know you have wronged them? Significantly as well, on another level, it is at a river, and cultural comparisons for that neighborhood of the Near East, and really ancient cultures worldwide, uh, are filled with stories of figures coming upon so-called river gods, where there is something supernatural in confronting the river. It's not that different from in a later version of this, uh, usually in like German mythology and stuff like that. You get like trolls hiding under bridges, and you come up and you want to cross the water at the bridge. You have to deal with the troll. You have to outsmart him, or in some cases fight him. You have to survive an interaction with a supernatural being in order to pass. And this is kind of like that. It is an ancient folkloric element within the story, suggesting that, again, they're working with found elements. The narrators or the narrative artists here, who are writing and composing and editing and all of this, are dealing with stories that had perhaps pre-existed from a much more ancient time, even from their own, and they're weaving them together in very deliberate ways. Here we have Jacob wrestling with this figure, kind of mysterious, a little, suspicious, and they wrestle throughout the night. The fact that it is nighttime casts a little bit of a doubt on this. Not much happens at night in the ancient world that is good. And here, this figure comes up out of the darkness. So there's already an association with something perhaps sneaky or dangerous or illicit in some form or another. The fight goes on throughout the night, and it is only when the sun rises and they're struggling that essentially it's a draw. The mysterious figure goes and in a kind of act of desperation wounds Jacob's hip, essentially dislocates his hip. And this, another curious little detail that just sort of sticks out, like, what is that about? It's another sign, quite frankly, of a kind of ideological element, where it's giving an explanation for how things came to be. And culturally, it is not kosher to eat anything connected with the sciatic nerve. So here it's like, we'll just throw this in there. This is why we don't eat that. And there's a whole other world of scholarship around that we don't really need to go into. But the fight is essentially a draw. The appearance of daylight seems to signal that the mysterious stranger needs to go away, almost like Dracula. He can't be seen in the daylight. So he changes. They ask one another's name. The stranger refuses to give his own name, another curious manifestation. But he goes and he changes Jacob's name. He says, "From henceforth, you will be known as Israel." Israel. Again, association with God, El. The relationship between them suggests a kind of symbolic struggle. It is not two people. It is not this guy named Jacob and just a mugger and they fight. It's more than that. It is representative of something larger. There's always the larger interpretation that is predominant here, that we are told to see predominantly. We are told that the name itself is symbolic and is roughly translated as he who strives with God and man, or has striven with God and man, somebody who wrestles, who fights. Again, remember wrestling. They have been fighting all night. And remember the grasping of the heel in birth. Jacob has been fighting his entire life, for good and for ill. He's always struggling. He's always fighting, striving for something a little different. That character is validated. That character is what the text is telling us is God's intention. Now, Jacob, having gone through that struggle, returns to his brother very much an obviously changed man. In confronting his brother, he humbles himself. He bows down. He kisses his neck. He just says, everything I have is yours. I'm sorry for everything I did. Everything in his behavior bespeaks a sincere, seemingly sincere contrition. You have to deal with whether or not you believe it, because he's been through an awful lot of very humbling moments since he last confronted his brother and his home, his youth, where he was such a sneaky little bastard. Everything since then, he's gotten knocked around a little bit. He's gotten beaten up. And now he's coming to confront the people that he has betrayed in the past, and he has been now betrayed a few times, and he has that perspective. Esau forgives him. Esau and Jacob have resolved their differences. They have outgrown them, perhaps. We are left to grasp or grapple ourselves with whether or not this is more trickery on Jacob's part, coming in, being just a little insincere, perhaps, in bowing down. We have no reason to doubt that he is sincere, other than his past relationship with Esau. And we're not told explicitly, like, more modern writers might say, and he had seen the error of his ways and corrected them and felt a wholehearted generosity of spirit towards his brother, blah, 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 blah. We're not given that kind of satisfaction, but we understand that in that essentially irresolvable doubt, we are meant to, like Jacob, struggle. We're all meant to wrestle with our own demons, to strive to know stuff, perhaps, to know God, to know our fellow man, to know everything we can, perhaps, to reject the simplicity of Esau, but to always lean forward and try and better ourselves, better our position. But that struggle, Israel, one who struggles, is eternal. It is who we are as human beings. And that's the way God seems to want it. Now, remember, this story, is just one chapter, let's say, or half a dozen short chapters in the longer story of God's relationship with humanity, starting with Adam and Eve. And God has had to, reboot that from time to time, and is always struggling on his own to come to terms with this quirky little creation that he has loosed upon the world. Uh, Other scholars have called this Jacob moment a kind of final striking a balance, a kind of, okay, we've gotten a working relationship going. It's imperfect. It's going to be bumpy along the way. We're both going to be striving against one another. We're both going to be struggling and fighting and wrestling with one another, God and humanity. But as long as we understand that that is the basic dynamic, then we can find a way forward. It's agreeing to disagree about certain things, but finding common ground where we can and going forward with that. That struggle is seemingly then, and we go back to the very first moment of Jacob and Esau in utero, that struggle is the condition of man. The ability to wrestle with stuff. Nothing should come easily. We shouldn't be just following our own our own whims. We should struggle. Significantly, Jacob, or Israel as he comes to be known, is a eternal figure of struggle. Even in death, we are told several chapters later that his life was short and difficult. His years were few and hard, I think is the translation in Alter. I could be wrong about that. His own father, as we said before, lived to a very ripe old age. If you look at the early cartoons in the graphic novel version, we're told he lives like 175 years, Abraham. And Isaac lived very long as well. So, that's pretty long lives between the two of them. We're told explicitly that they live to a good long life, or some derivation of that language. But we're told that Jacob, by contrast, is, less long, and his life was hard. And we've experienced an awful lot of that, of the struggles. And he will have struggles with his own son and sons in the story of Joseph immediately following this. That sense of it's never easy is the prevailing takeaway, I would say, here. And it's not supposed to be. Now, think from a leader's perspective, again, a political leader in the time of David, where this is all ancient history to you. You want people, it's easier to deal with people if they're more willing to accept suffering. If they understand that God wills that, life is supposed to be kind of rough. We're supposed to work, and things aren't always going to be all that easy. Well, that's how you get stuff done. When you have a large group of people who are willing to endure suffering and endure hardship in the understanding that this is what God wants, it's supposed to be this way. Well, you can build a great civilization like that. This again is, a common theme throughout the ancient world. As long as you understand that, nobody promised you a rose garden. Don't expect everything to be, to be flowers and finger sandwiches. that is a force of society that can be used to great ends. Versus if you raise up a group of, coddled, entitled, spoiled brats, who think that everything should be, going their way at all times. Of course, I deserve that. Everything's supposed to be easy and fun and feel good. That is very difficult to achieve anything with on a large scale from a leader's perspective. So understand always that these stories are being laid out in very specific ways to validate certain things, denounce certain things, and to offer up certain other questions that are essentially irresolvable. But by introducing something that is essentially irresolvable and creating a mechanism by which you feel compelled to try to resolve it, to strive out of some kind of innate curiosity, perhaps, that creates the chemistry for a very vibrant and competitive culture. And that's what I can see going on here. That's what I can see happening in this story of Jacob and throughout the Hebrew Bible and throughout a lot of the ancient world. Using these stories that come down through, tradition, local legends and folklore and stories that grandmothers tell their grandchildren, and stitching them together with the proper frame, emphasizing certain things very deliberately, squelching some others, or maybe just leaving one or two little oddities in there for people to puzzle over. This is how a great civilization can be brought into being. A creation of literature.